You know, usually when we talk about like medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just absolute precision.
Right, like engineered certainty.
Exactly. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line in the bone, and the doctor just points to the screen, and they say, there it is.
It's entirely binary.
Right.
It's either broken or it's not.
Yeah, the data is clean, it's undeniable, and it's right there for the naked eye to see.
And that visibility is deeply comforting to the human brain, right? We naturally gravitate toward things that we can just easily categorize and measure.
Oh, totally.
Like in medicine or engineering, we crave that empirical certainty because it gives us a clear path forward.
But then you step into the world of human dynamics. Specifically, you step into the corporate ecosystem or your local community board or even just your family structure.
The messy stuff.
Right. And you try to run an x-ray for quote unquote leadership. And suddenly that diagnostic machine we rely on is just completely broken.
It doesn't work at all.
No, it really doesn't. We're looking at this landscape for evaluating what makes a leader, and it's fundamentally murky. Yet society pretends it isn't.
Society acts like that leadership x-ray is perfectly calibrated.
Exactly. The prevailing logic is that if you aren't the loudest person in the room or, if you aren't barking out directions and rallying the troops, the x-ray comes back negative.
It basically says, no leadership material found here.
Yes. And that's exactly what our deep dive is about today. We're unpacking our sources to look at a radical rethinking of what leadership actually looks like.
Which is so needed because what we're dealing with is a profoundly narrow, culturally conditioned lens. And organizations constantly misdiagnose incredibly talented people as lacking, simply because their strength doesn't register on our outdated machinery.
We measure leadership almost entirely by its volume, which means we're missing the most crucial operational forces in our organizations.
We really are.
So, if you're listening to this right now, yes, and you've ever felt like you lack leadership skills because you shy away from the microphone, we are going to completely flip the script on how you view your own utility.
We need to start by looking at the Japanese framework of Chawagata.
The harmonious leadership type.
Exactly. It operates on entirely different physics than the Western archetype of the aggressive commander. But, to appreciate the quiet mechanics, we first have to dissect the loud ones.
Right. Before we can talk about the quiet stuff, we have to examine the megaphone myth. We have to look at the landscape of loud leadership.
Which is really a spectrum of momentum if you look at the data.
It is. The sources break down several traditional, highly visible archetypes that dominate our cultural understanding, starting with most classic one, the directive type.
The directive type is basically the default setting for how we visualize authority. When you picture a Fortune 500 CEO during an earnings call, this is what you're imagining.
Working out orders, making things happen.
Right. The core mechanism is highly accelerated decision-making, paired with really clear, unambiguous instructions. They operate on a pulling force.
They plant a flag in the ground and literally drag the organization toward it.
Exactly. And you can see why that's seductive. In a crisis, people don't want a philosophical debate, right? They want someone to point to the exit.
They are the tip of the spear. But the spectrum of Lao's leadership doesn't stop there. You also have the democratic type.
Which sounds gentler.
It does. It sounds more collaborative. But structurally, it's still a highly visible center stage role.
Oh, absolutely. The democratic leader relies on consensus building, sure, but they're still the focal point. Think of them like an orchestra conductor.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
The conductor isn't playing every instrument, but they're standing on a podium in the center of the room. They're entirely visible, dictating the tempo and the volume.
They're gathering opinions, but they're synthesizing them in a very performative, undeniable way. And moving further down that spectrum, you hit the disruptors.
The transformational type and the visionary type.
Right. The transformational leader's core competency is basically demolition. Their mandate is to break down legacy systems and build new ones.
And you simply cannot be a disruptor quietly. Demolition is inherently loud. You have to break glass and upset the old guard.
And then they're paired with the visionary, who operates by drawing this hyper-compelling picture of a distant future.
They pull people forward through the sheer gravitational force of a narrative. It's a reality distortion field.
They convince you that the impossible is inevitable, as long as you follow them. Which brings us to the final loud archetype from our sources, the charismatic type.
And this one is fascinating because it's so elusive.
It really is. I want to use a specific cultural example from the text to illustrate this because it captures the psychology perfectly. Think of the character Griffith from the dark fantasy epic, Berserk.
Oh yeah, That's the perfect avatar for this.
Right. For anyone unfamiliar, Griffith is a mercenary leader who possesses this innate, magnetic, almost supernatural pull. People don't follow him because of a logical business plan.
No, they flock to him because he projects this aura of absolute destiny.
Exactly. The aura of inevitability.
And the psychology behind that charismatic type is wild because it effectively suspends the critical faculties of the followers. When you're in the presence of extreme charisma, your brain's analytical centers actually downregulate.
Wait, really? Your brain literally turns off its critical thinking.
Basically, yeah. You stop asking how we're going to achieve the goal, and you just trust that the leader's sheer force of personality will somehow alter reality to make it happen.
It's like the lead singer of a stadium rock band. They get all the spotlight, they're pacing the stage, demanding the crowd's energy. But let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
We can't just dismiss these loud archetypes as mere ego trips, right? Aren't these traits rapid decision-making, setting clear direction, commanding a room? Aren't they fundamentally necessary for human progress?
Oh, they absolutely are. Yeah.
Right. If a legacy company is bleeding capital, you need a transformational leader to break the old machine. If I'm sitting here realizing I lack this pulling force, aren't I objectively lacking as a leader?
And see, that is the exact anxiety that sidelines millions of capable people. But here is where we have to separate the function from the form.
Okay, unpack that.
Yes, fast decision-making and visionary polling are real valid forces. You definitely need them in the ecosystem. But the trap is thinking in binary terms.
The trap is assuming there's only one way to do it.
Exactly. It's the assumption that the only way to move an organization from point A to point B is via a combustion engine.
The loud fuel-burning engine?
Right. Think about a sports car. It's loud, it burns highly combustible fuel, and it relies on controlled explosions. It pulls itself forward through sheer mechanical force.
Aggressive.
Very. And if you judge all vehicles by the standards of a sports car, then yes, lacking a V8 engine means you're broken. You're missing an essential part.
But I mean, I might not be a broken sports car. I might be a sailboat.
Precisely. And a sailboat operates on completely different principles of physics. It doesn't generate its own violent forward thrust.
It utilizes the environment.
Yes. It reads the wind, adjusts the tension on the sails, and leverages external currents to create momentum. It requires a vastly different, highly sophisticated set of skills to navigate.
Skills like observation and subtle adjustments. And it's entirely capable of crossing an ocean.
Exactly. It just does it quietly.
That is such a crucial distinction. The tragedy of the modern corporate landscape is basically a sailboat looking at a Ferrari and thinking, I'll never cross the ocean because I don't have an engine.
When really the problem is that the sailboat is trying to drive on an asphalt highway.
Yes, and this brings us right to the core of the alternative frameworks. If we accept that the combustion engines aren't the only way to generate momentum, we have to look at the mechanics of the sailboats.
We have to examine the quiet alternatives, starting with what the source text structurally calls the coaching type.
We're shifting from the megaphone to the waiting room.
The waiting room. That is the perfect way to frame it. Because when you examine the mechanics of the coaching type, it highlights a profound paradox.
To an outside observer looking for a loud boss, the coaching leader looks like they aren't doing anything at all.
Right, they look passive. They aren't standing at the front handing down answers.
They aren't pulling. Their core mechanism is focusing entirely on drawing out the latent analytical power that's already sitting dormant within the other person.
And this forces us to confront a deep psychological bias regarding control. Culturally, we associate leadership with hoarding control.
We think the leader has to be the person who has all the answers.
Yes, and giving up that control, deliberately choosing not to provide the answer, even when you know it is a massive cognitive and emotional hurdle. It requires immense psychological strength.
It essentially requires the strength to shut up.
It does. It requires the strength to tolerate inefficiency in the short term, to guarantee capability in the long term.
Because it's so much easier just to give the answer.
Think about the cognitive load of that restraint. You're watching an employee struggle with a complex problem. As the leader, you likely already know the most efficient way to solve it.
The loud impulse is to step in, take the keyboard, and say, here, let me just show you.
Because it's fast. And subconsciously, you get to be the hero.
Right. You get the dopamine hit of saving the day. Everyone in the room acknowledges your superior competence.
Exactly. You reinforce your own indispensability. But the coaching type actively suppresses that heroic impulse. Instead of providing the solution, they ask a targeted question.
Like, what variables do you think we're missing here?
Or, if you had to design the first step, where would you start? And then they wait. They just sit in the silence.
They let the other person wrestle with the cognitive friction.
And they listen to the very end of the stuttering, flawed explanation without interrupting to course correct.
It's an agonizing amount of restraint. I kind of equate it to watching a 5-year-old try to tie their shoes when you're already 10 minutes late for school.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison.
You could reach down and tie those laces in 3 seconds. But if you do it for them every single day, they arrive at middle school unable to tie their own shoes.
You have to stand there biting your tongue, watching them fumble.
Because the ultimate goal isn't just getting out the door today, it's engineering an autonomous human being who can tie their own shoes tomorrow.
And that analogy scales perfectly to the highest levels of global business. We aren't just talking about abstract theory here. We're talking about the strategies used to build massive monopolies.
Like Eric Schmidt during his tenure leading Google.
Right. You don't get much more high stakes or high velocity than Google scaling up. And Schmidt is widely analyzed as the quintessential coaching type leader.
Because when he was brought in, he was dealing with founders and engineers who were arguably much smarter than he was in their specific domains, right?
Absolutely. If he had adopted a directive style, if he had stood at the front with a megaphone dictating every line of code, he would have destroyed the company.
He would have become the bottleneck.
Exactly. The smartest guy in the room is always the bottleneck. The organization can only process information as fast as that one person's brain can make decisions.
So how did Schmidt navigate that? How do you lead a room full of geniuses without telling them what to do?
You deploy the Socratic method at scale. Schmidt didn't issue micro-instructions. He designed his executive interactions entirely around inquiry.
He threw out deeply challenging questions during product reviews.
Yes, forcing the engineers to defend their own logic, to spot the flaws in their own code, to articulate hidden risks. He wasn't handing them the map. He was constantly asking them to recalibrate their own compasses.
Which fundamentally alters the architecture of the company. If the leader makes every decision, you have a single point of failure.
But if you spend your time coaching, you raise the overall judgment level of the entire organization.
You decentralize the intelligence. You go from a single V8 engine to a fleet of highly calibrated sailboats.
That is the exact mechanism of scale. The pulling leader creates followers, but the coaching leader creates a web of competence.
It really shifts the entire definition of what the leader is doing in the room. You transition from being the primary speaker to being the primary active listener.
And the act of asking a question becomes this profound structural display of trust.
You're essentially looking at your team and signaling, I believe your brain is capable of solving this, and I'm willing to risk our capital and our time to let you prove it.
It's an investment of trust that pays compounding dividends. And it requires absolutely zero shouting.
Just immense intellectual stamina. Okay, so if the coaching type is all about empowering the individual, we then shift to a slightly different flavor of quiet leadership in our source text.
Right, the structural engineers of the team's dynamics.
Exactly, the servant and affiliative types.
Okay.
If the coach builds the individual, these types are about securing the environment itself. They are the invisible foundation.
Let's break down the mechanics of those two, starting with the servant leader. This framework describes a leader who structurally prioritizes the operational support of others over their own visibility.
Their primary skills are observation, empathy, and anticipation.
Yes, they operate in the background, constantly scanning the environment. They're the ones who notice which team member is quietly drowning in workload.
They anticipate what resources or political cover might be needed before the team even hits the roadblock, and they quietly prepare that groundwork.
They're the ultimate stage crew.
They're the riggers up in the rafters, making sure the lights don't fall on the actors, and then functioning right alongside the servant is the affiliative type.
If the servant manages the resources, the affiliative leader manages the interpersonal web.
Their superpower is the curation of relationships. They possess this acute ability to walk into a room, instantly read the emotional temperature, and soften the atmosphere.
They stack up trust.
And I want to highlight a massive contrast here. Earlier, we talked about the directive leader's relentless pulling force, the acceleration. But with servant and affiliative types, we're looking at the power to reconnect relationships.
It's the difference between acceleration and maintenance. And frankly, corporate culture severely undervalues maintenance.
We fetishize disruption, but we completely ignore the physics of friction.
Think about the life cycle of a deeply transformational, loud leader. They come in, break the glass, and create a massive spike in productivity for like 18 months.
But they almost always leave a trail of organizational trauma and burnout in their wake.
They burn the furniture to keep the house warm. The servant and affiliate leaders are doing the quiet, continuous work of making sure the structural integrity of the house doesn't collapse.
Let's bring in the real-world evidence for this from the deep dive sources. Because it's easy to dismiss this as just a nice, warm and fuzzy HR theory.
Let's look at Tony Tsai at Zappos.
Right. We all know the legend of Zappos' customer service, the rep staying on the phone for 10 hours with a customer. But what's rarely discussed is the servant leadership architecture he built to guarantee that output.
He didn't just walk into a call center and tell everyone to be nicer. He engineered an entire corporate ecosystem around servant principles.
His core philosophy was that if you prioritize employee satisfaction and psychological safety over rigid metrics, the employees will naturally transfer that care to the customer.
Exactly. He didn't build a billion-dollar shoe empire by screaming about profit margins. He famously offered new hires cash to quit after their training just to test the alignment of the foundation.
He removed the rigid scripts. He treated the company culture itself as his primary product, trusting that if he served the employees, they would serve the bottom line.
And the market rewarded that massively.
And if we look across the Atlantic, our text shows the affiliative mechanism perfectly embodied by Richard Branson and the Virgin Group.
Think about the sheer breadth of Branson's empire. Airlines, music labels, trains. You cannot possibly be a directive leader across that many disparate industries.
You can't be the smartest engineer in the room about jet engines and broadband networks, so what is his mechanism?
He doesn't manage the domains. He manages the connective tissue between the experts. His leadership style relies heavily on flattening the threat response in the human brain.
By maintaining a highly informal personal style and removing the barriers of corporate hierarchy.
Right. He signals to the amygdala of his employees that they are safe.
The amygdala being the fear center of the brain. When the brain detects a highly aggressive or punitive leader, cortisol spikes and the brain shifts into survival mode.
And in survival mode, you don't take creative risks. You just keep your head down.
Branson's affiliative style actively suppresses that fear response. By establishing deep interpersonal trust, he unlocks the prefrontal cortex of his entire workforce.
Creative risk-taking skyrockets. The brand's agility is a direct biological result of his affiliative leadership.
But wait, let me push back here. Let's be ruthless. If you're a servant or affiliative leader, prioritizing people and softening the mood, aren't you essentially putting a massive target on your back?
Especially to the outside world, right?
Yeah, to aggressive competitors or a board of directors that only cares about quarterly earnings. Don't you risk becoming the designated corporate doormat?
It's a very valid fear. And it's why young managers abandon these styles for loud ones at the first sign of pressure. But it fundamentally misunderstands what affiliative leadership is.
How so?
Let's look at the data. Did Richard Branson look like a pushover when Virgin Atlantic was locked in a brutal dogfight with British Airways? Did Tony Hsieh build a weak company?
No. They achieved world-class, ruthless market success. So what's the hidden steal?
Building trust isn't about giving people whatever they want or lowering standards. It's about recognizing that long-term survival relies on human connection.
The foundation of trust allows them to separate the person from the problem.
Exactly. They soften the interpersonal tension so they can be ruthlessly hard on the operational problem.
Because a pushover avoids conflict due to fear of emotional fallout.
Right. Being a pushover is passive. But an affiliative or servant leader steps directly into the conflict, senses the underlying needs, and does the complex work of resolving the friction.
That's a massive paradigm shift. Servant leadership is intensely active. It's just active beneath the surface.
It takes immense structural backbone to tell investors, we're prioritizing psychological safety because this culture will outlast our competitors. That's not a doormat. That is a structural engineer holding the line against bad physics.
That's not a doormat. That is a structural engineer. I absolutely love that. It repositions empathy as a hard strategic asset, a defensive moat around your organization.
Precisely. And that reframing is the perfect bridge to what I consider the most universally applicable part of this entire framework from our deep dive.
Yes, because up until now, we've been operating in the stratosphere with global billionaires. And if you're listening to this, you might be driving to work thinking, okay, this is fascinating theory for tech monopolies, but I manage a regional logistics team of 6 people.
Or I'm trying to keep my extended family from killing each other at the holidays.
Right. It is so easy to assume you need massive scale to practice these skills, but the text pivots brilliantly to bring the camera way down to ground level.
We need to look at how you are likely already practicing this exact kind of high-level leadership every single day. We're talking about the boardroom in your living room.
The core argument is that the experience of acting as a mediator in everyday life is actual undeniable proof of elite leadership capability.
Let's look at specific scenarios. We're talking about those moments where you physically or verbally step between two family members who are arguing, and you de-escalate it.
Or you're out with friends, someone makes an insensitive comment, and you smoothly redirect the conversation to diffuse the tension.
We've all been there.
You're at Thanksgiving dinner, Uncle Bob starts bringing up inflammatory politics, your cousin's face turns red, and you instantly jump in with, "Hey, who wants to see new pictures of the dog?"
And in the moment, that doesn't feel like leadership. It feels like survival and damage control.
Exactly. But let's freeze that moment, because the cognitive mechanics of what you're actually executing in that split second are immense.
To successfully mediate that family fight, you're utilizing highly advanced cognitive and emotional processing power.
Wait, really? Just changing the subject to a dog picture requires advanced processing.
Absolutely.
Oh.
First, you have to possess the situational awareness to even sense the mood shifting before the explosion happens. You're running background environmental reading constantly.
You're tracking the baseline emotional state of the room.
And the moment it shifts, you engage theory of mind. You instantaneously imagine the internal psychological positions of multiple opposing parties.
You're figuring out why Uncle Bob is escalating and why your cousin is being triggered. You're reading micro-expressions and shifts in vocal cadence.
It's like having a military-grade emotional radar constantly sweeping the room. You're gathering massive amounts of biometric data.
And then comes the strategy generation. You have to instantly calculate a safe landing spot.
Right, a new topic or a joke that diffuses the tension without invalidating either person. And crucially, without making it obvious that you're actively managing them.
Because if they realize they're being managed, they'll turn their aggression on you. So what does this actually mean for the listener? How do we translate this Thanksgiving survival tactic into professional capital?
It means these behaviors aren't just quirks. Being the peacemaker isn't a flaw. These are fundamentally executive-level communication skills.
I think this is where a lot of people's perspective on themselves needs to shift. I've always thought of that kind of background social management as just being overly polite or conflict avoidant.
But the exact same mental machinery required to reroute a volatile dinner party is identical to the machinery required to navigate a high-stakes corporate merger.
The machinery is identical, only the context changes. Look at the internal monologue of the mediator.
You're constantly running a complex background simulation, internally drafting dialogue trees like, if I say this specific sentence, employee A might rebel.
Or, if I use this adjective, it might trigger employee B's imposter syndrome, but framed this way, it validates them. Oh man, I do that constantly.
It's exhausting, isn't it?
I will draft a 3-sentence email in my head 4 different times because I know one verb will make my colleague defensive, but another will make them a collaborator.
And it's exhausting because it's high-level emotional calculus. You didn't just wake up with that ability. You've been training that specific neural pathway your entire life through complex social interactions.
So if you already run those interpersonal simulations, you are fully prepped to guide large groups of people. You just operate on a different frequency than the loud commander.
I love how you phrase that.
Yeah.
A different frequency.
Let me try a new metaphor here. The loud directive leader is like someone grabbing the master volume fader and shoving it all the way up. It's loud, but it causes massive distortion and blows out the speakers.
Right.
The quiet leader, the mediator, is like an audio engineer sitting in front of a 64-channel mixing board. They aren't just adding noise.
They're listening to the whole mix.
Yes, finding the exact frequency causing a harsh feedback loop and subtly EQing it out so the whole song actually sounds brilliant.
That is a phenomenal metaphor. The loud leader relies on brute force. The quiet leader relies on friction reduction and frequency alignment.
Which is such a liberating framework, because it takes something highly empathetic people view as an exhausting burden and recategorizes it as high-level leadership software.
It is deeply liberating, but only if you actually operationalize it. And that brings us to the final, most difficult psychological hurdle from our text.
Because it's one thing to listen to this deep dive and think, oh, my empathy is a skill.
It's another thing entirely to walk into your office tomorrow and not immediately fall back into crushing self-doubt the second you see a loud colleague getting praised.
The relapse is real. How do we stop staring enviously at the neighbor's lawn?
We have to address the psychological habit of comparison. When you're quietly managing your team's emotional web, and you look across the table at a charismatic leader getting all the validation, it's biological to feel inadequate.
You admire their visibility and think, if only I could command a room like that, I'd be a real leader. Been there, felt that imposter syndrome.
But we need to initiate a massive perspective flip here. While you are admiring their brightly illuminated lawn, there's a very high probability they're looking at your skills with a profound sense of lack.
Wait, really? The loud executive is secretly jealous of the quiet mediator.
Think about their operational reality. They burn through talent. They push so hard that relationships constantly fracture around them. They're exhausted because they have to be the engine every single day.
Oh, wow, I never thought about that.
They might be looking at you wondering, how does their team stay so remarkably loyal? Why do their employees actually trust them on a human level?
They see your ability to harmonize as an unattainable superpower.
The grass is green on both sides. It's just a completely different species of grass requiring different soil.
I honestly never considered that the guy with the megaphone might go home at night wishing he knew how to whisper.
It's human nature to overvalue the traits we lack. Admiring the directive type is fine, but the danger lies in the assumption of necessity. Believing you must become them is catastrophic.
Catastrophic because you artificially narrow your own possibilities.
And you introduce massive inefficiency into your life. If you can only imagine achieving your grand ambitions by fundamentally altering your personality to become loud, you're setting yourself up for failure.
You're trying to rip the sails off a sailboat and bolt a heavy V8 engine onto the deck. It's just going to make you sink.
You'll spend 90% of your energy managing the psychological costume you're wearing, rather than actually doing the work.
You'll feel like an imposter because you're literally acting. And this is where the harmonious leader, the Chawagata, becomes the ultimate solution.
Taking that path is not a compromise. It is a completely realistic, mathematically proven option. You do not have to amputate your natural tendencies to achieve massive things.
There is an incredible sense of relief in that. It flies in the face of decades of toxic corporate self-help telling us to fake it till you make it or dominate the room.
It is far more sustainable to optimize the listening and mediating skills you already possess. Let go of the comparison.
The exact moment you stop obsessing over the fact that you aren't pulling everyone forward, you realize your quiet observation is the ultimate tool for organizing the air of any community.
Because if the air is toxic, it doesn't matter how fast the visionary leader is running, everyone is going to pass out.
The quiet leader ensures the air remains breathable. Okay, let's synthesize exactly what we've uncovered today from our sources. What we've learned fundamentally redefines that leadership X-ray.
Leadership is absolutely not exclusively about a loud voice or pulling people forward by sheer blunt force trauma.
The loud combustion engines are valid, but they represent just one specific mechanism of momentum. What the data proves is that quietly supporting your team, doing the invisible work to reconnect relationships, and asking questions instead of spoon-feeding answers. These are not soft skills.
They aren't participation trophies. They are proven, world-class executive leadership architectures.
The servant, the affiliative, the coaching, the harmonious types, they are the foundation builders. And to you, the person listening right now, think back on your life.
Think about those moments you spent smoothing over tense arguments.
Think about the times you guided a meeting back to safety without anyone realizing you were managing them. Those were not moments of you just being nice.
Those are the training grounds. You have been running high-level executive drills your entire life.
You are already highly trained. You just needed the right diagnostic lens to see your own capability. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Yes. The next time you find yourself in a room where an argument's brewing or the energy is gridlocked, pay attention to your instinct.
Your instinct might be to shrink back and wish a loud commander would take charge.
When you feel that urge, stop. Ask yourself, how can I use my highly trained, quiet observation to silently steer this room to safety? What subtle question can I ask to shift their perspective?
If you lean into that instinct, you might just realize that you are already the most powerful leader in the room without ever having to raise your voice. What an empowering place to leave it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources, and we'll see you next time.